Hi, welcome to the Emergent podcast. We're super excited today to be talking about software development life cycle. For those of you who love acronyms, it's SDLC. So today we have a guest on who's an expert at SDLC. He's done it for tons of clients in the past. He's made it his life's goal to, really know the ins and outs. He's going to take us through what's new in SDLC, how it's changed. You're going to hear words like Waterfall versus Agile. He's going to walk us through how things are really improved and why they needed to be improved. So yeah, we're pleased to have Sal on the podcast. Sal, how you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Yourself?
I'm doing great. It's cold and rainy here, but why complain about the weather?
Never helps anyway to complain, but yeah, we've got really similar snow on the ground, kind of fun.
Yes. And if you're listening to this in July, just know that life has gotten better, and because I'm really tired of just overcast days.
Sal, if you're listening to this in July, I'm complaining now about how my lawn is burned, and it's too hot. So just never happy.
Right. That's funny. That's good. So Sal, take us through kind of your expertise, what you've been up to the past couple of years, and what you do at Emergent Software.
Sure. So I've been with Emergent Software for about 5 years now. I'm the director of product delivery here, which means that I spend a lot of time talking about our process and how we can make sure that our clients are successful when engaging with us. Prior to joining Emergent, I spent 13 years at a pretty large company, United Health Group. Wore a lot of hats there as well, jumped around from department to department, kind of spreading the word about Agile, spreading the word about how to successfully build software projects, especially large-scale software projects. Ended up leading a team within the PMO there that was working on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of software investment per year. And so, as you can imagine, when you start scaling that large, having good, crisp processes that are efficient for you is really the only way to be successful. Otherwise, you kind of get bogged down along the way and you can't really meet your goals. And so kind of living and breathing it for the last couple of decades, and certainly excited nowadays to bring some of that knowledge and experience to our clients.
Yeah, that's great. So let's just jump right in it. For those who are asking, what in the world is software development lifecycle? What even is that? Can you just briefly explain what SDLC is and why it's crucial in the software development process? Like you said, why such, crisp processes are important to maintaining efficiency?
Yeah. Well, I think it's great to kind of start at the beginning, which is, technology and such, the advent of computers and software development projects. At the time, large-scale projects usually meant manufacturing. They meant building something physical. And so the processes that kind of got us there were immediately applied to how are we going to build technology projects, software. And so a lot of the regimented plan until you've gotten every single thing predicted, and then start doing those things because you can see how it's going to evolve into your final product. And those long development cycles, a lot of those processes were brought to the software development world right from the get-go. The term that we use for applying those processes is a waterfall mindset or waterfall methodology. And for a while, that was kind of the only game in town. That's how people knew how to handle large scale investment projects. And so as the industry sped up, though, as software became kind of the next frontier and the speed to market became more measured in days and weeks as opposed to years and months, that methodology just didn't work for people anymore. And so the advent of modern software development practices, things like Agile, really came from the necessity of speeding things up, getting to market faster, and figuring out how to still leverage some of those original principles, what we now call the SDLC, but leverage it in a much faster way so that we can not only get what we need to the market, but also get what we need to the market at the time the market needs it from us. But if we plan today for what we're going to need 2 years from now, the market's going to move past us by the time we get there. And that's true in every industry in the world right now, not just, individual industries and places. So
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I, for some reason, have never kind of put two and two together, that the agile mindset makes it so you're actually competitive. That if you just stick to this roadmap of like, no, we have a plan. In 2 years, we're going to launch this. And then in 2 years, it's not relevant. Well, that's a good way to get a company to go under,
oh
especially when you're
yeah.
pouring so much money into it.
Yeah, and especially at the micro level even, right? Like maybe that product's still the right answer, but maybe what your clients are expecting of you by that time is different. If we think about things like how website experiences have evolved, it used to be that I'd go to a website like Facebook and Amazon, I'd have a pretty lengthy experience on that site. Whereas now, a lot of people pop into that site, they want to do what they're planning to do, and then they want to be off of that site.
Right.
Probably more applicable in the Amazon world than the Facebook world, where folks do tend to still sit and scroll for a while. But there's definitely a change in the expectations of user experience. And if we had planned today what Amazon was supposed to look like 10 years ago, then we would have gotten it completely wrong, because again, we have the right things, but not in the modern way that people are expecting. So
right. No, it makes sense. And I know, just like recently, to give an example, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Facebook was going really hard into the metaverse, and they were just dumping money into it, right? And it just wasn't being profitable for them, right? So they had to do, I guess, the agile thing and divert resources away from that, because it wasn't bringing in revenue at a time when they really needed cash, right?
Yep. Yeah, there's a term that's often used in tech companies called failing fast, right? Move quick and break things is a phrase that you hear a lot from the big tech companies. And it's all about, if we think this is something that we can do to capture a market opportunity, we should do it quickly, see if it works, test it in like a bite-sized piece, and then move on if it doesn't work. Let's not get married to that idea and throw good money after bad. Let's just see if the market reacts, and if so, let's double down, and if not, let's move on to something else.
Interesting. And how do you take that same approach with clients? Because in-house, I imagine, is it a different process when you're working with clients than when you're in-house, and how so?
I think the main thing that we've noticed, and myself in a lot of the conversations I've had with clients, is that that mindset, it's ingrained in us as software development experts, that that's how software development is meant to be built, be conducted. But from a business strategy perspective, it's not always seen in the same way. And so what I mean by that is that a lot of clients come to us and say, we know what we want. Please give us a bid and then go and build it for me and give it to me 6 months from now.
Right.
And so I'm starting by educating them, hey, I don't know anything about your business yet. I hope to learn a lot more as we talk, but I can tell you right away that that approach is going to be risky. How can I help you to understand what are those minimum things that you need in order to get value in your market? And how do I do that for you as fast as possible? I'm not interested in signing up for that 10-year-long project with you. I want to do something in the next 4 to 6 months that's going to change the way your business operates for the better. And then we'll just do more things like that. And that's how we can grow together in partnership, as opposed to, I signed a deal to help you build that cool new website 2 years from now, but by the time we get there, you're not interested in it. I don't want to build it for you anymore because it's not the right thing for your business. And now we've kind of wasted each other's time along the way.
Right. And I can see, correct if I'm wrong, but when you're in-house and you get, a 2-year project, it's kind of like, oh, well, awesome. This is 2 years of job security kind of a thing. Like, let's not push the envelope when, and in 2 years, I probably won't be around anyway because of how quickly people are leaving jobs, right? Is that how it works? Would you rather have a longer time frame when you're in-house?
I think a lot of times in-house, those decisions are made, especially in larger companies. As I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time in some pretty large companies. Those decisions are made at that macro level to show that we have a plan, right? But at the front line,
I see.
that plan is interpreted a little bit too literally, right? Someone said, we need a new website that looks kind of like Amazon. And before you know it, everyone's going to the Amazon site, taking screenshots and saying, let's build exactly this. And
Right.
that wasn't really the vision. The vision was, let's do something like that. And if you peel back
Sure.
the onion, the vision probably wasn't even, let's copy them. It was, let's respond to the things our clients need that they're getting from them and they're not getting from us. And so we kind of have to dig even deeper. And I think as consultants, that's one of the things that I like to spend a lot of our time with clients up front about. Don't tell me what you think you need. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish. Tell me what success would look like. And then let's figure out together what we need in order to achieve that success.
I see. Okay. And how long does that process usually take? Is that a couple weeks? Is that a couple phone calls? Like I imagine your answer is going to be, well, it depends. It depends on the scope of the project and whatnot. But just some average, like.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend. So you called that for sure. But I think the answer really scales with how much fidelity do we want in that vision. Right away at the beginning of an engagement, we want enough knowledge so that we know what direction are we heading together. Can we box it in, put up some guardrails? Whereas, when it comes time to actually build an individual piece of whatever the software is going to end up being, I want a lot more detail at that point. And so
Right.
one thing that we try and do by leveraging a more flexible framework, kind of taking it back to that SDLC that my grandpappy used to use when he was building software versus the SDLC that I use today. We try and be more agile by deferring some of those decisions until we need to make them. So help me understand the big picture. Let's point ourselves in a direction towards success, but then let's make those minor decisions a little bit closer to when we're building those individual pieces so that we're not promising something today that 6 months from now, when we get around to doing it, isn't what we want anymore.
I see. And so what I'm understanding from what you're saying is that this actually gives a lot more responsibility or empowerment on the people who are actually in the weeds building the thing, right? Because then they have influence, and because they're the ones actually seeing it, to go back to the team and say, hey, we need to tweak this, and this is why this plan isn't working, as opposed to the overlords on high. The C-suite just tells you what to do and you just need to make it.
Exactly. I think it's that shift in mindset away from, I'm just working as a short order cook, I'm building the thing that someone else decided, to, I'm a partner in the success of this project. It's leveraging the talents of everyone involved, whether that be on the business side, the technology side, any of the aspects that are touching that project, and giving everyone the ability to speak up and say, this is how we ought to do that. What and why, that's going to be determined still by those leaders with those visions of where they want to take the company and stuff like
Right.
that. But how is kind of the key question. And when how is answered by someone who isn't going to actually do it, then you lose the benefit of all that knowledge and experience and such from those frontline folks that are actually going to implement that solution.
Interesting. Okay, this is really cool. This is like a new perspective on Agile, that because I have used Agile in companies before, and it still was kind of just a top-down, more waterfall technique, but they called it Agile, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we had sprints and we planned every 2 weeks. I wish that company had implemented it like you're saying, because I assume that would have been a lot more fulfilling for me as an employee, and I would have learned more and I would have been more invested in the success. Is that an output of Agile implemented correctly?
I think so, at least in my experience. And what you're describing is super common across all aspects of the industry. People hear Agile's the wave of the future, so we're going to start doing Agile ceremonies and doing Agile things. And before you know it, we're still doing the same thing we did last week. We just have a couple more meetings every week, or more
Right.
paperwork to fill out, or we're calling it something different.
I'm going to
So
read 2 blog posts on Agile, and then we're just going to head down. We're going to do it.
yep, exactly. Exactly. But when you really adapt to the changes that Agile's trying to encourage, it's not have different meetings. It's not do things once every 2 weeks. It's empower the people that are going to be actually building those solutions, and empower them with the knowledge of what you believe the market needs and what your customers are saying. Because that's not an inconsequential piece of this either. We don't want to hear just from that C-suite. We want to hear from those customers where we can too, because they're the ones that ultimately will use this product or solution. And so as much as we can, let's hear from them. And if we can't hear directly from them, let's hear from the client managers that are talking to them. How can we get as close as possible to the consumer of that product? If it's external, the clients. If it's internal, maybe there's an operations team that's going to be using this all day long, and let's get some of them in the room and talk to us. These are the changes from yesteryear, when we would just make all these decisions in the boardroom and then just push it out. Now we want to really kind of have a conversation, adapt to what the needs are, right on that front line, and then build something that's going to fulfill those needs, and assume that if we did all that right, the whether it's revenue or whether it's efficiency, all of those things are going to come as a key success indicator. But it starts with, let's make sure that we're not just making decisions on behalf of other people. Let's engage those people.
Awesome. That's a really good explanation. I like that. I like the way you're putting this. So that was kind of an overview, right? Like a high level, what is SDLC? What is Agile? What are the benefits of it, right? And from what I'm seeing is a lot of people break the SDLC into 7 stages, right? Just to list those really quickly. They are requirements gathering, planning stage, design stage, implementation stage, testing stage, deployment stage, and then maintenance stage. And I assume that some companies might say, oh, well, for what we're doing, we're going to reorder them, or we're going to combine some stages or whatever. And that's fine. So what I like to do now is just kind of go down the list of the stages. And just from talking to you before the episode, I know that these aren't necessarily in a rigid order, right? The whole point of Agile versus Waterfall is that you can jump between the stages and it's not linear, right?
Yeah, I think if we look back to that history lesson from the beginning, right? 50 years ago, not only are these stages, these might be multi-month stages, right? Requirements and analysis is going to be the first 6 months of our new big project. Then we'll go into another 4 months of project planning and another 3 months of design. Well, look at that. A year has gone by. We haven't built anything. Probably spent a couple $1 million along the way, though. And so, taking away from the true rigid, we do all the requirements and analysis of stage 1 that we want to do. And then when we're done, there's no more requirements to be defined. There's no more analysis to be done. And we have moved past that. That's not what we do anymore. That is the quintessential waterfall project. And so in Agile, we're going to take elements of each of those things, and we're going to do as much of it as we need to do to be successful right now. We're going to have a big picture in mind that we've all agreed on and a roadmap. But then we're going to iterate through, and we're going to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to build individual pieces of value add technology. So maybe that means I can build widget 1 today. I can test it. I can deploy it. I could even potentially get business value out of it if it's something I can present to clients. And then I'll come back and build widget 2, and then 3. And then maybe it's time to enhance widget 1 a little bit before I get to 4. This is the kind of flexibility that Agile gives us. And this is what Waterfall would not have allowed for, where we made those decisions 2 years ago that said, once we're done with 3, we're moving on to 4. We don't care if there's feedback about 3 that came in that says it's not that great. That's a change order, and we're going to have to figure out how to handle that with another 2 months of planning. That's the models of the old world that we're trying to avoid.
Right. And I'm sure from a client perspective, that's so much better, because then you can get value. Like you've already said, you can get value out of a project in the early stages. before it's completely built out. And, cash is king, right? Everyone
Yep.
needs cash flow. So,
Well,
cool.
and it's everyone in the team feels that, right? It's not just, from the corporate perspective, hey, we made more money this quarter because we released this new thing. I mean, that's a good outcome. But also along the way, think of all of those folks that were a part of that project that are excited that not only did they build something useful to their organization, they're getting that pat on the back saying, look, our clients love it. And,
right.
they're getting that feedback saying, can it do more of this? That brings excitement to the job. Whereas, hey, you built this, it's going to be another 2 years before we get any use out of it. So no one really cares. Maybe a client finally gives some feedback, 6 months down the road, and that feedback is scrap everything that you did and start over. I mean, that's not very fulfilling. No one really likes to be a part of those kind of projects. So,
Amen to that. Yeah.
yeah.
That's a good example. Okay, well, let's just jump into the stages. So first one we'll talk about is requirements gathering. In your experience, how do you approach gathering and documenting requirements from clients effectively? What does your process look like?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two flavors of that. As I mentioned, we want to have an understanding of the big picture before we start getting into the nuance of, this screen needs to do this, or we need, a report that says that. Where are we heading? What's the roadmap here? What's our goals and what will be success at the end of this? By having that level of understanding, we can then kind of pin everything else against that plan and say, all right, here's where we should begin. Here is the information that we need to know to do part one. And so looking at that roadmap, looking at that, how do we get from I have an idea to I have something valuable? We've here at Emergent Software kind of come up with what we like to call a workshopping process, where we ask a series of questions to help not only see what you're thinking, but also kind of see why you're thinking that those might be the right measurements for success, and give us an opportunity to learn enough to be able to give you feedback on that. So, we're not experts on your industry, but we're definitely experts on building software to solve complicated problems. And so if we can understand the nuance of what you see the opportunity to be, hear what you think the solution might be, and then kind of work together to figure out, what's the approach that makes the most sense, that to us is a successful start to a project. And don't worry, you don't need to know all of those answers day one either. We spend a lot of time with clients that say, well, I have a part of that. I know that I want to move into this market, or I know that I want to capture this opportunity, 2 months from now. But I have no idea how to get from here to there. And so, our team members spend a lot of time working with clients to help evolve that process. We use a lot of different tools, whether that be whiteboarding. We do a lot of fun exercises with Post-it notes, either in person or virtually. We have a lot of techniques that we can use to really help kind of suss out that vision together. And then once that's aligned on, then it's just a matter of, all right, let's get into the details of the first thing that we need in order to head down that path.
So can you share some examples of challenges that you've faced during this stage of gathering requirements, and how you like to overcome them?
Yeah, I think a good answer that I'd give you to that is a story that I actually experienced with one of our clients a couple of years ago, where we started talking about their website. We started talking about what they needed in an upgraded new website with a bunch of new functionality. And invariably, we always get to that point of, all right, here's all the new ideas, but then don't forget to tell me about what it does today and what we still need to keep, because the new ideas are the fun ones, right? That's what everyone wants to talk about.
Right.
But we also need to make sure we don't lose anything along the way. Well, this particular client, they were able to rattle off all of the stuff that their current site does, but it was less of a in-depth conversation at that point. And so it kind of gave me the sense that they weren't thinking critically about what are the things that we actually need to bring forward into our new platform. And so one of the techniques I like to use is just ask a lot of questions about, why is that important? Help me understand that piece. And one of the pieces in their instance was a loyalty program. You buy so much, you get points. The points allow you to redeem for prizes or whatever. And come to find out that not very many folks redeemed those prizes through their website anyway. They had sales reps. The sales reps would constantly talk to people, and the vast majority, I'm talking like 95% of those loyalty point redemptions were just the sales rep saying, hey, you want me to send you whatever gift, a gift card, whatever,
Right.
And nobody's using the website for that. And so now, I've got this big piece of functionality I got to build. It's going to cost this client tons of money well, not tons, but it's going to cost them enough to build out a piece of functionality that their sales reps aren't going to use, and they're just going to put it all in the back end anyway. Seems like a great thing for us to maybe drop off the list day one,
Right. Okay, cool. That's a good example. So let's move on to the next stage. This would be the planning stage. And I would say, because we've kind of talked about this already, right? So maybe just touch on how you prioritize and set goals during the planning stage to ensure a successful development process. Because I know, it feels like every company I've ever worked at, setting goals, everyone says they're so important, right? But it seems to be so difficult to do. um, so do you even set goals in this stage, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I think if I'm thinking sequentially through an engagement, that first taste of planning that we're going to do together with a client is going to be trying to understand where the big pieces fit into the puzzle. I like to talk a lot about, what could be a release that we do somewhere along the way. If we think about, our end goal is to build whatever new website, that sort of thing. Are there pieces of it that are useful that we can stand up and build and release sooner? And usually that gets a good conversation going about, maybe there's a back-end tool that the sales team uses and it's really clunky. Well, I can build a new tool. It'll point at your old website for now, and then it'll just point at the new website once we have the new website up. And that's valuable to your sales team, and maybe it's valuable enough that it's worth doing first. So that level of planning with kind of those big milestones in mind of, what should we focus on first and then go from there. I think that's still a key part of our process. Obviously, we also need to do kind of the traditional project management planning. Is there a deadline at the end of this? All the fun stuffs. Any seasonality associated with business is important to know as well, not just from when we're going to release, but like a lot of times clients tell us our busy season is, these months or this quarter. We're not going to get their attention during that time to help give the feedback we need in order to be successful. And so we should plan around that, because we don't want to be that partner that disappears into the back room for 3-4 months and then comes back with a piece of software and says, hope you like it. We want to be talking about it all the time. And so, if it's not a good alignment for us to have access to the people that can give us that feedback, let's make sure that our plan accounts for that.
Right. So that was the planning stage. So let's move on to the design stage. Talk to me about the design stage. What are you designing? What role does it play in SDLC? And how do you balance the need for innovation and creativity?
Yeah. So now I think we're really turning that corner into, we're no longer trying to do as much of this up front before we get going on building whatever the software solution we're going to be building is. Design, again, in the past would be an exercise that would take months, where we'd have every single screen drawn and we would be able to say, this is what it's all going to
Right.
look like. We haven't built any of it, but we've spent months on getting this far of drawing it all. What we're going to do nowadays, our approach at least, is we're going to say, what is that overall flow? What are the things that we need to make sure are available? And that's going to be high level, and that's probably going to be somebody drawing it on a virtual whiteboard sort of a thing. Then from
Sure.
there, we're going to grab that first piece that we're planning to build, and we'll design against that. And there are a lot of ways that we can go about that. We have design experts on our team that can do high fidelity, pixel perfect. This is exactly what that screen is going to look like. We have a lot of UX expertise within our team where we can do more of a wireframe approach of, here's kind of what it's going to look like. Might look a little cartoony when we draw it, but then we'll hand it off to the engineers, and they'll come up with the best way to produce something that's efficient using that design as a guideline. So maybe that means that we're gonna change that drop down to a radial button so that it's kind of similar to all the other radial buttons we've built or something like that, but still kind of taking the influence from that design that we all saw. The main thing we don't want to do, again, is make those decisions without you. We want to hear your feedback. And the other thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to push those decisions too heavily upon the folks that have that creativity, that are going to be making the actual software product, and then limiting their ability to leverage that creativity. So as much as we can, keeping that conversation about what do you need, why do you need it, and then let's take that how to the people that will actually be getting their hands dirty to build that piece of functionality, and we'll bring some best practices along the way, but we're not going to tell them just copy this, again, short order cook order, right? We're going to tell them be creative and do something that meets these needs.
Right. I probably should have you saying this brings to mind, like, do you use a certain tool? Do you use a certain software for these stages? Do you have a favorite app for different, are there different apps for different stages, or do you use the same software for the whole process?
Yeah, I would say we definitely have a few tools in our toolkit that tend to pop up over and over again throughout this process, but we don't kind of limit ourselves to a singular tool to facilitate all of these conversations. Like I said, there's definitely been times where we've gone on site with a client and just grabbed some Post-it notes at Office Depot on the way, and we've just put them on the wall and moved them around, right? And that can be very very productive experience and give folks a chance to kind of not worry as much about the process and worry more about what are the ideas. There are some tools that we like to leverage. I myself use a free tool called Draw. It's available at draw.io website. And all it is just kind of a virtual whiteboard. So, there's not a lot of fanciness to it, but I've gone and customized it with a whole bunch of the kind of standard pieces that we often need when we're envisioning a solution. So we can drag and drop, entire modules or technology pieces and kind of move quickly through that ideation and planning process. But beyond that, there are definitely a handful of other kind of standard tools that are out there that there's really no wrong answer.
If someone was just starting this, right, and just shout out like 2 or 3 of your favorites.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones in the industry is a product called Figma, which is mostly a design product for like creating either wireframes or high resolution designs. If you're looking for something a little bit lighter weight, a product called Balsamic is a wireframing, very cartoony looking kind of product, but it really gives you a lot of those kind of standard website and application components to work with. I mentioned draw.io, that's a personal favorite of mine. Really, honestly, I got my start using MS Paint for some of this, so yeah, when I say you can't go wrong with anything, I guess maybe that one's one that I wouldn't recommend as highly.
Gotcha. That's funny. Okay, cool. Well, let's keep plugging away. What the implementation stage is next. What coding practices and methodologies do you find most effective during this stage?
Ooh, that's a whole podcast in of itself.
Right.
So we definitely have seen, as projects scale in complexity or team size or both, the rigor with which you manage your development process becomes kind of a force multiplier to the success that you can achieve. I've been a part of projects in which We're constantly getting questions about, you're doing all of this pipeline automation, making it so that as you're trying to deploy things, they move through a process that tests it and builds it and pushes it to an environment and such. That's a lot of steps that we just don't see value in. Well, my response to that is all of those steps are what allow us to scale. It's what allows this team of 5 to become a team of 10 when you need it. There is a balance, of course. We don't want to overinvest in some of that stuff, but the rigor is an important part of the ability to be successful. The other thing I'll say, and this is kind of taking another little bit of a tangent, is that the more rigor you bring to your process, not just in how you build the code, but also how you maintain the code, can be a key metric for how successful your product will be in the long run. In the industry, we have a term called tech debt, which is basically the idea that you're going to build something and then you're going to bolt on some other functionality, and eventually you have something that looks like you welded it together in your garage and it's got all these pieces, but they're not like really integrated with the rest of the platform. And one day you're going to go to add one more piece on top and the whole thing's going to tip over. That's bad. We don't want that.
Right.
And so taking the time to like truly integrate new functionality, make it a part of the platform, do the maintenance and upkeep you need to make sure that it's not just welded to the side of your product, it's a part of your product. Those are some real keys to long-term success of products. And the companies that don't do that, they might move a little bit faster, but they pay the price in the long run.
Interesting. Okay, well, you just condensed a whole podcast in just a couple of minutes.
There you go. That's freebie podcast within a podcast.
That's crazy. The value people are getting from this episode is insane. So let's move on to the testing stage. So I imagine just like any of these stages, right? You're going through all of them all the time. How do you go about the testing? Do you kind of carve out time specifically to like, hey, everyone in the team, come in, like, let's all test it? Or is this the role of the person who's building it? It's like, oh, you need to build it and then you need to test it. Or is there like a QC process? What does that look like?
I'd like to answer all of the above. So part of the organization is our quality assurance team. So this holds a special place in my heart as well. But I do believe that the quality of a product is kind of the culmination of everyone's efforts. That said, I also do believe in the value of quality assurance experts in the entire software development process. And so right away at day one, when we're talking about here's what we need to build next and here's why we need to build it, I want my quality team in that same exact conversation with my engineering team to hear those same words from our end users, to understand why we're doing something, and to be empowered to not only question, hey, does this really work or not, but also question, does this really meet everybody's needs or not? And so, we go through an exercise of kind of following the development process here with our quality team. We hear those requirements up front. We hear the engineers talking about how they plan to meet those requirements. We're kind of planning out our approach of how we're going to test to make sure that they actually are meeting those requirements. But we're also providing feedback and providing guidance along the way with the expertise we've accumulated from being a part of so many projects. And so, I'd say there really isn't a step along the way in which our quality team isn't engaged in some way. And a lot of times, finding bugs, providing feedback on things that don't work is just a small part of what they do to ensure the success of our projects. I think a lot of times it's more of that, expertise on end user workflows, end user designs, what's going to be successful. And once we get to the point of having something that we believe is ready, our quality team are the ones that are bringing it to users and saying, here's how it works now, test it, tell us what you think, give us feedback. They're conducting those sessions, and that's, invaluable towards making sure that we've actually hit the mark with what we've produced.
Well, cool. So that was the testing stage. Let's move on to the deployment stage. I imagine that this is the most exciting stage, right? Maybe not for you. Maybe you are just loving being in the weeds and the planning, the requirements gathering. But I imagine for a lot of people, the deployment stage is their favorite stage. So, how do you approach the deployment of a client's software product, and what considerations are essential for a successful deployment?
Yeah, so I think it all depends on where we're at in the life cycle of that product. If this product is not being leveraged yet, it's something that we're building and no one's really using it in production just yet. The deployment stage is just kind of an ongoing part of that process where we're bringing more and more functionality into that environment. And then one day we're going to say that's enough functionality that it's useful to introduce to our end users. And so in those kind of projects, those individual deployments add a little bit more here and there. No one's really noticing that other than the people involved in the project. And so there's not as much fanfare associated with it. But man, when we bring that whole thing to that end user group and it's brand new and they've got all sorts of bells and whistles on it that they need in order to do their job, that's where the celebration begins.
Right.
And so, that's definitely the part where we all kind of kick back for a minute and say, wow, good job. We're very happy with how that went. Now let's
Right.
plan what comes next. Once it's in production though, those little minor changes, that is something that we like to see happening quite quickly as those needs are identified. And so that deployment phase might just be the culmination of a week or two's worth of work. And what we're deploying might be relatively transparent to end users if it's something on the back end, some stability or security things, or it might be game changing to end users, depending on what it is, right? New functionality, something that changes the workflow for one specific department, and now all of a sudden they're able to, be way more efficient about what they're doing. So it definitely depends on what we're deploying, how it's received, but there's always some excitement that comes along with that. And if we've done our job right, that excitement is all positive user feedback, not like, oh my gosh, is this going to work?
Right.
So,
Okay, cool. And so then the last stage, which seems to me from an outsider perspective to be the stage that might just be ongoing, right? The maintenance stage. So talk about ongoing maintenance and updates once the software is live. Like I imagine if, you're publishing something to the Apple App Store, right? Every year Apple is updating iOS with a big update, and then this needs to be updated. Is that part of the maintenance stage?
yeah, I think the maintenance stage is the one that has morphed the most as we've moved from more of a waterfall methodology in the industry into a more agile methodology. It used to be that we mission accomplished, we built everything, this is all we need, and now we just need a very small amount of keeping the lights on, that once a
Right.
year patch or change, right? And that's about it. The market doesn't react to that very well anymore. The market wants to see new and fresh. They've forgotten about your product if it hasn't changed in a month. And so that maintenance concept has really turned into more of how do we address that tech debt, those things that are holding us back from adding new features, new bells and whistles when we have those ideas, while still focusing on those enhancements, those bells and whistles along the way. And that's where a partner like Emergent can really help you to understand, here are the things that are going to have that positive long-term impact in our ability to be nimble and create new functionality on your platform, so we can focus on those alongside that next batch of new features or functionality.
I see. Okay. So, we've kind of gone through all the stages of SDLC. So when you look at it, in its entirety, just quickly to end, what kind of advice would you give to developers and teams to ensure a smooth and successful process? What things have you seen where it's like, oh, once I changed this, everything got a lot better? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think some of the key tenets, regardless of your methodology, regardless of if you remember these stages from our talk here today, one of the key things that I'd have you walk away with are, how are your users, your clients, or your end users internally going to influence the direction of your product? How are they going to provide that feedback and help you to understand what works and what doesn't for them. Not the folks in the back room, not the leadership at the organization, but the actual consumers of that product. As much as you can incorporate that into your process, regardless of whether you're in Waterfall world, an Agile world, a more modern DevOps approach, all of those methodologies have one thing in common, which is they're not going to work at all if the users don't give you their feedback. And then the other thing that we talked a bit about today was just how do we empower the folks along the way to be creative and use the expertise that they've spent so much time gathering throughout their careers. And so if we can talk more in terms of what is needed and why it's needed and less in terms of how, that will allow those creative folks to leverage their knowledge and figure out the best possible way of doing things.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Sal, for hopping on this podcast with me. I really appreciate your insights, and I definitely learned some things. And I think some of the things that I've taken away from this, letting the people with boots on the ground have a little bit, I hate to say longer leash, but it's the best thing I can think of right now. Have more leeway to input things. Because I know in my experience as a digital marketer, I've sent out countless emails and I've built countless, nurture campaigns and everything. And the ones that go the best are the ones where someone kind of hands me a loose framework and says, hey, can you kind of figure this out? This is our vision. It's like, okay, then I get to ask questions, right? Then when we deploy, those are usually really successful. But in my career, I've noticed when people just say, do exactly this, and I do check marks, I check the boxes and then deploy, that's when I make mistakes, because that's when I just turned my brain off and just went through the motions and didn't think about, oh, well, how does this affect our whole company as a whole? How does this affect other marketing efforts? Like, let's look at this from the broad perspective, right? And that's when I've gotten in trouble. So I like that this is kind of the best way forward, because it makes so much sense, and it's such a much more fulfilling way to do work. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. You have a good day. Take care. Okay, bye.